Welcome back. Today we are going to talk about the Kiwi Ears Dolce. And for those of you who follow these things, you'll remember that we got introduced to Dolce by this blue to black faded faceplate. Pretty cool. You don't see too many fades like that on faceplates. And the rest of it is a pretty standard, nice build quality for $20. It says Kiwi Ears. They did a pretty good job at running the blue theme through the tips and the box and, of course, through the faceplate. So, yeah, no real complaints on the build quality. It's actually a very small, very comfortable shell. I think they did pretty well there. The cable is the flat 2 style that you'll recognize. KZ uses actually a similar one, and you actually get the angled QDC connectors, which is something that KZ uses also. So a lot of what you need to know about Dolce is right here on the graph, and I consider cadenza to be sort of the middle of the road. Going back to the Harman pack of, late last year, we had a lot of sets with a very similar tuning, and they were very similar to cadenza. So if we look at the dotted line, that is the Harman target. So cadenza was just a little more mid-bassy than the Harman target there. Pretty much hit right on the Harman target and then kind of sloped over in the way that you would expect. So if cadenza is the middle of the road, then I would say Dolce is more of a preference set. People who prefer more mid-bass, more treble, they have a preference that is sort of different than what the middle of the road is. And I wouldn't call that good or bad. And reviewers will say, oh, there's too much mid-bass, that's bad. Too much treble, bad. That's not what this is. This is all about how you prefer to listen to your music and what your preferences are. And why you would choose Dolce is because it's got more mid-bass or more treble. There is something about this signature that is going to appeal to certain people, and certain people it will not. And I would call that, something that cadenza is very much a middle of the road. It'll work for people who you don't know any preferences, but Dolce is definitely more of, you really have to enjoy mid-bass to enjoy that level of mid-bass, and this boosted treble, again, that is something that is going to be something that you prefer or something that you avoid. And if you avoid it, then you go to something like cadenza, which again is just more general appealing. So we'll kind of go through this one quickly because that is a lot of what you need to know about it. So this one, again, it's almost taking the cadenza signature, which you see here in the blue, and making a V out of it, bumping up both sides into a V shape. That's generally what the sound is like. And so this one is for the V fans, but I would call it tastefully bright. That treble lift is on the brighter side. There is enough mid-bass there for general appeal, but again, I think there's just enough treble there that it will come off as a little bright. Actually, a decent execution of more bass, more treble. Like I said, they sort of lifted both ends, and I tend to refer to this tuning as more bass, more treble, and you keep on increasing these values until you get a sound that you like. And you're basically increasing the bass so it's nice and fun, nice and thick, male vocals sound great, and then you increase the treble so you make sure that there's enough clarity in the female vocals sound right and it doesn't sound too dark. So you kind of end up in this feedback loop of adjusting these two so they are in balance and there's enough clarity there over a fun amount of bass. So that's exactly what they did, and they did a pretty good job of doing that. Just as I said, make sure it is aligned with your preferences. That mid-bass level, if you are a mid-bass level fan, you like a lot of mid-bass, you'll probably cheer on this one. It is a high level of mid-bass. Even for $20 sets, it is a high level of mid-bass. If you are a mid-bass quality fan, you'll probably say it's a little bit too much for an appropriate amount of clarity. It will kind of cloud up the middle. In the realm of $20 sets, this one is a fun level of mid-bass, much more than the recent Harman sets. Like I said, it's definitely more than cadenza was pretty much the middle of the road for those. So this one is a good almost 5 dB above that. More like KZ EDA, the bass model, is actually, I think, the same exact bass shelf. It's pretty close. So the sound, like I said, is that more bass, more treble style in the V. Semi-rare, thick male vocals, and it works well with electronic genres that play into the V. So this, when you see signatures like this, they tend to work really well with male vocals. They tend to make them really thick and weighty. You don't get that everywhere because a lot of people try to follow the Harman and dip this out or tuck it in, and it's a little rare to find sets that really bump out the mid-bass. So those lower mid instruments and vocals actually come across weighty and thick. It's not something you find every day. and it's kind of interesting to listen to it in this style. So yeah, I sort of applaud what they did there. So the bass, again, fun, thick mid bass, but perhaps slightly overstep in the mid bass level, as it really makes the driver sound a little less capable. There's really a fine line of where all that mid bass fun starts to muddy the waters, and this one just kind of crosses that line. The brighter upper range levels do cut through, as you would expect them to, and that's the point of this tuning like this. But again, it's really hard to get around the fact that that's just a lot of mid bass. You prefer that, that's perfect. If you aren't really sure, then cadenza is probably a safer bet on both sides. This is, again, as I said, Dolce is one for people looking for those levels. The mids, okay, kind of given what's given to the left and right. Like I said, a lot of mid bass, a lot of treble, rock with male vocals. Those male vocals, again, they kind of play well into that mid bass level. If you're into Taylor Swift, that will kind of shift you towards that thinner, brighter pop sound and might require some volume tweaking. So like I said, thick male vocals, that's one side. This side, where it gets a little brighter, Taylor Swift's voice kind of carries up into the red over there, and that becomes a little brighter, a little thinner, and it really carries over. It doesn't really dip out a whole lot, cutting across all the way through an extended treble. So I tended to, especially on the female vocals, just lower the volume. That's like 13 something dB of pinna gain. It's right there on the higher side, so it's definitely a healthy amount of energy, and it really favors lower volume listeners. Treble elevated, but not as peaky as it looks. Again, it kind of works well with the lower volume people. Lower volume listeners will find some enjoyment there, and has plenty of upper range energy for the rare combination of a lot of mid bass and a treble that doesn't fall flat. So typically what some, especially budget sets, do, they'll bump the mid bass up to here, but leave the upper treble kind of where cadenza is or lower, and that tends to make this really dark. It's really hard to hear this over an elevated mid bass level. So this is sort of the rare combination of more bass, more treble, so you can hear everything over this. And again, like I said, they kind of got that balance right there in that style. Again, lots of energy to be heard over the bass. Like I said, as I said, with the bass, the driver seems more capable than it appears. And again, the treble is one of those things that I think this style of tuning, that much mid bass, that much treble, I think this one could have gone all wrong without a more capable driver. So I do think that the driver is actually pretty good. The tuning, as I said, it's either your preference or it's not. And I wouldn't necessarily blame the driver on it, but I do think it's a little more capable than it appears with this tuning. Stage, the upper treble energy offers some height and some space, but the width is average. Just not really enough projection on the width. Not far off from typical $20 set, but I think this one does. That's kind of where you see the gap between a set that's $20 like Dolce and then its bigger brother like Cadenza, which had a much better stage at $35. I think that was the price of Cadenza. So there you go. That is a quick run through of Dolce. So thank you again for tuning in, and I will see you next time.